Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I welcome you back to part two of a two-week series with our guest, Karen Wright. Our guest has written a very fascinating book that is called Sequoia Seed, and we got through part of that last week, and we will finish that this week. I want to indicate that our guest has had fascinating experiences in life, and that really, I think, produced the book of encouraging people to, I guess I could call it living their dream, or not being afraid to reach out and to realize their potential. She was born in the state of Washington, and she grew up in the Yakima Valley. She graduated from Washington State University with a teaching credential and degree in English and art. And one of her many experiences was that she taught junior high school students in the Seattle area for 8 years. And she ventured into San Francisco, where she became a TV news reporter for an independent television station and a marketing director for a film company, and also was a personal shopper for customers at Nordstrom. She moved to Los Angeles, where she became a corporate leadership trainer. It's really a great illustration about how she reached out and had great experience in her life, and that's the theme of the book. I also want to quote something that she said that was very interesting. I think that's very telling of her in her book, when she once said, "I've lived a nomadic life, always searching and learning." And I think that is really the thrust and theme of her work. Karen, thanks for coming back and being with us a second week.
Thank you.
And I'm pleased to have our panel back. Our visiting panel member is Patty Dickinson, and our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, who is an attorney. And I must say about Patty Dickinson, she's a very well-known author, and she's also very instrumental in the Idaho Writers League. And thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
Your book is called The Sequoia Seed, and it has a reason behind it. The sequoia seed grows into the mighty sequoia tree. So can you kind of tell us how your book is divided up and what you're talking about in the book?
Sure. The metaphor itself is really around not only the potential that lies within the seed, this tiny little cone that grows into a tree that's taller than the Statue of Liberty, actually. Do you know that it would take like 21 adults holding hands to go around the base of like the General Sherman tree, which is the most widely known sequoia tree? But that tree usually it gets birthed from fires that roll through the hills. And the trees themselves are not, they're kind of fireproof, if you will. But the cone, which is very tight and lies on the ground, opens up with the heat of the fire that comes through. So what releases the seed into the ground is a fire. And I got to thinking about, our own personal lives. And although we have great potential inside, sometimes the circumstances that we live through don't allow that potential to shine forth. And based on the fear of that circumstance, we will either squash that potential or we'll let the seed be planted and we'll let that potential kind of come forth.
And of course the fire, and then the mighty tree bursts forth.
Yes, yes. And, and that's, the book is divided into 3 different chapters, really, or 3 different segments. And the first of them is really kind of assessing where you are in life right now. And the second one is really looking at spiritual skills that you can hone or sharpen, if you will, that allow you to see circumstances a little differently, perhaps approach things with a greater sense of confidence and a greater sense of results in doing that. And then finally taking a look at releasing that potential. The tree grows, releasing the potential, living the life that somewhere deep inside you had a feeling was there for you, but you questioned it or you were afraid of it. And finally stepping out and saying, as a lot of people say, what's the worst that can happen? But really having the faith that if you've got that dream inside you, you've got the capacity to make it real as well.
Thank you.
At the end of our show last week, Patty Dixon wanted to ask a question, and the clock won. It always does. And so I know we have viewers back that want to hear that question. So we'll
Absolutely, and a week is a long time to sit on an unanswered question. What I would like to know is, when you're talking about the concept of self-talk and its negative and how it affects our health and all.
Yes.
Okay, the first step you said is in recognizing this.
Yes.
Okay, what is the progression beyond this, as in an effort to recognize it, and then what? What
Okay.
comes next?
Sure. And to be really honest with you, Patty, recognition is such a key step, because becoming aware of anything opens up all kinds of possibilities beyond that. So, just getting to the point of becoming aware of the self-talk that you've got going, just listening in every now and then. What is my mind telling me about my life, about myself, about my possibilities? And recognizing that, there's a lot of things that I'm saying I can't, I shouldn't, a lot of self-talk like that. Once you become aware of that, then asking the question, is this really true? I mean, is it really true that I can't do this, or that I'm not worthy of something? And when you stop and you ask that question intellectually, instead of letting your fear drive the question, you recognize, that isn't really true. Or somebody might have said that to you at some point in your life, but it's not true of you. It was their opinion of you. So recognizing the self-talk, asking the question really blatantly, is this true? And then recognizing that there's a different way of perceiving this. If my statements are, who am I to write a book? What do I know that other people don't know out there? What can I tell them they don't already know? My self-talk around that kept this from being a book for a while. And finally it came down to, I have this urge to do this. I have this burning desire to do this. And I think a burning desire is our inner selves talking to us. And where we have a burning desire, we've got the capacity to make it happen.
One thing that you say in there is that, do you own it?
Yeah.
Now, what does define own? Is that the truth?
Yeah.
Or what does that mean when you say if you own it?
Well, I think what I'm referring to with if you own it is a statement that somebody else might say toward you. They might make a judgment of you that, you're not a very good writer. If you give that statement inner truth, if you own that statement, then you're basically saying, you're right, I'm not a very good writer. Where we're taking someone else's opinions of us as truth.
I see.
Instead of, I kind of look at that, and it's not easy. It's not easy to have somebody say, you're not a very good writer, and to not own it. But if we can recognize that that's that person's opinion based on their own beliefs, their own values, their own perceptions of life, not based upon who I am as a person, then we can kind of not own that and sort of act like Teflon, and let it roll off. And it's like, well, it's your opinion, but, I don't have to own your opinion.
I see. Thank you.
That's very good. Last week I forgot, although they put it up on the screen, there are people who want to see your book and read it, and so we need to give them a contact. And so I think you have two. You have a place where they can contact you. They'll put up on the screen, and then you also have a website. If
Yes.
you would verbalize those, and they'll put them up on the screen.
Sure. You can contact me at Karen, Karen, at rightminded.com, and it's on the screen, so you see the spelling. And my website is rightminded.com, and I do a lot of different things, but you'll find my book out there, and you can actually read a couple of chapters for free. There's about 3 chapters out there in the book.
Okay. Well, I'm sure they'll want the entire book. That'll get them to do that. I have a series of questions, and my first one has to do with something that happened in Spokane to you. It's such a powerful thing. You like to walk, and taking good care of oneself, physical health is very important. But you had a couple of experiences of how kind you were. You might not say that, but you were. You were very kind to people that oftentimes don't get compliments, and I think it's such a beautiful example of how we can reach out to make life better for others, or maybe help their self-esteem. Would you share those experiences?
Yeah, boy, this was at the it's a Centennial Trail. I go walking there quite a bit. It helps me to clean out, I guess you could say. And I was there, it was during the summertime, and the grass had just recently been mowed. And I usually walk over near the entrance off of Pines, and there's a waterfall back in there. I don't know if you guys know it or not, but it's Marabou Park area. And the grass had just been mowed, and it just smelled wonderful. And I was over near the waterfall, and I saw a couple of ladies that were park workers, and they were putting things back in the back of the truck. And I thought to myself, you know, that I enjoyed this so much, and they just made everything beautiful. They'd worked on the flowers, and they worked on the grass, and picked up the litter, and you know, everything was just so gorgeous. And I thought that I wanted to let them know that. You know, I wondered whether or not they ever got those kinds of that feedback very often. So I had to chase them down, actually, because they drove off before I could follow up on my impulse, but I had to chase them down. I found them in another part of the park and walked up to tell them how much I appreciated what they did, you know, for everybody who was there.
And the response was great.
Yeah, the response was just, they beamed. I mean, they just beamed, and you could tell that they just didn't get that kind of feedback very often.
And you did also with a police officer, too, didn't you?
Yeah. Actually, he was a security officer there at the park as well, and they're protecting cars. You know, making sure that when we leave our cars and walk off for an hour and come back, the car is there and not broken into and all of that. And he was a little bit more suspicious, but that's kind of his nature, I think, you know, in that profession. But when I walked up to tell him that I was really happy that he was there and guarding out for us, he was suspicious at first, but the moment I told him that I was very happy he was there, he just beamed as well, you know.
Mr. Wooden, who was a basketball coach at UCLA, the most successful one ever in our history. John Wooden has a statement similar to that, saying that every day you should do something kind for someone who cannot repay you in any way. And so I think that is a really important theme. Janelle Burke.
In every family there are differences, and you have a chapter on family squabbles. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I have to say that's a chapter that I have a hard time reading without crying. And it's a real story about my mother's sister that died in a hospital about 3 years ago. And I have a very big family. My mother has 11 siblings, and so I have lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, and most of them are in and around the Yakima Valley. And we got notification that my mother's sister was in the hospital. She had hepatitis and was in the hospital. She had had a relapse from an earlier occasion, and they weren't sure that she was going to actually live much longer. So Mom called me, and we all headed to Yakima, which is, you know, several hours drive. And when I got there, I mean, we were the only two. We were there at 2 in the morning. We were the only two there. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, a lot of our other family members started showing up. And these are family members that, you know, over the course of time, we all end up in grievances with one another, and, you know, so-and-so's not speaking to so-and-so, and somebody did somebody wrong, and so there's all kinds of squabbles that end up in any kind of family. But what I experienced there was that because we all were there for the purpose of this woman, you know, my aunt, and our love for her, and our care for her, and our fear as well, that we were able to let all of the rest of the squabbles go. And people that were, you know, that hadn't spoken with each other for a while, were hugging one another and sharing, you know, our grief over what was going on with my aunt. So it just kind of brought it full circle to recognize that, you know, we end up in bickers and conflicts that really don't have substance when it gets down to what's really important in our lives, and that the love that we share with one another, the relationships we have, are so much more important than any squabble we might have.
Thank you.
Patty Dickinson.
I love the chapter on decidophobia. And I've never heard the term before, but I love it.
It's in the dictionary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's. I assume it's so. What makes some people have decidophobia? And there's no pill you can take for it, right?
Not last I knew.
Yet. Oh, God. But what is it? What's the basis of decidophobia?
Fear.
Fear.
It really is. Procrastination is based in fear, and decidophobia is kind of based on procrastination. I think that in many ways, when I've looked at my difficulty in making a decision, it wasn't so much about, it was about the result of that decision. What if? And that word pops into my vocabulary a lot, it seems like. But if I make this decision, what if that's going to happen? What if this is going to happen? What if I fail? What if I should have chosen something else? And so what we'll do is, instead of deciding, we'll decide to not decide. And we'll procrastinate the decision, which is where decidophobia kind of comes in. But, you know, like any other fear, it ends up being kind of a vicious circle, that the longer we postpone a decision, the harder the decision becomes. And like anybody else who's faced a decision that's been really, really hard to do, once you've made the decision, the real cosmic joke is that it wasn't that tough. You know, after the decision gets made, it's everything we put in the way of getting to that decision that is the hard part.
Excellent.
Maybe an experience here at this point would be great. When you moved to San Francisco, that's a great story in the book, and I think I understood that you said that you thought you'd arrive and you might become an anchor woman rather quickly at one of the commercial stations. And tell the story. It's so encouraging to people who are trying to decide, you know, and what you went through, but how it turned out.
Well, I've always been a person who believed that rules were made for someone else, and that, you know, the standard or the process that is outlined to go through is if you don't have any other motivation, then here's a standard process you can go through. So when I moved to California, to San Francisco, which at the time was the number 5 market in the nation in television, I thought, you know, I can do this. I can get into TV. I wanted to be a talk show host is actually what I wanted to do. And so I started making phone calls around to different TV stations, and of course they all just laughed me off the phone, saying, you know, you need to go to, and they mentioned Podunk, Idaho. I don't know that Podunk is in Idaho, but there is a Podunk. I've learned that there is a Podunk city. But they basically said, go out and earn your stripes. You know, go get your experience somewhere else, then come back to us.
So you didn't own that?
I didn't own that. No, I didn't own that, to be really honest with you. I thought, okay, that's your opinion, but there's got to be a different answer here. So I kept making phone calls, and I finally got in touch with an independent station, not an affiliate. And I talked with a lady there who was a temporary. And she talked with me, which was really great. And she said, you know, here's what I did. I went out to an agency, a temp agency that places broadcast temps. And so that's what I did, and I went to the agency. They placed me with a CBS affiliate. I worked for them as a secretary in the newsroom, and they plopped me back and forth between the newsroom and engineering, back and forth over the course of most of a summer while everybody was on vacations. And ended up talking with the news director and the news manager about what I wanted to do, and they let me cut a tape with a teleprompter and a cameraman, and then critiqued it for me. And from that, I didn't get a job with them, but he connected me with an independent station, and I ended up getting a job with them.
Great story.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to do before I go back to the panel, and that is, throughout the book, there are little sections, even a different type, about people who have been reading your journal or your internet connections. You have some great stories in here. And I'm going to ask a very unfair question. It's like asking someone who has 6 children, which is your favorite?
Oh, dear.
And so, of all these stories, maybe I shouldn't ask it which is your very favorite, but which is one of those, or if you might pick it out of the book, that you think that would be very inspiring to our audience?
You know, it's the first story that I got from readers. I wanted to put stories in from the readers that had been reading my e-zine for a long period of time, because they were writing to me all the time, and they had great stories. But it's in the chapter called Greatness. And it's a story about a teacher on an Indian reservation, and about a student of hers who had been diagnosed as being slow. And she found, in working with him, that the kid was actually very, very bright. But his diagnosis through testing had shown him to not be very, very bright. And so he owned that, and he behaved accordingly until she worked with him. And she basically set him down one day and said, I don't care what this test score says about you. That is not who you are. And he approached things in a very odd way, I guess you could say, a very unique way of approaching things. And she basically related to him, you know, you're just like Einstein, you're just like Michelangelo, you're just like anyone who has had original thoughts that were scoffed at by others because it was not the norm at the time, but ended up being geniuses in the long run. So she was able to actually convince him to not own someone else's poor opinion of him. And he graduated, which was unusual in that particular Native American community. He graduated high school, graduated college, went on to, you know, live up to his potential.
There's such a great story there, and there's some luck in life. And one of them is that he was fortunate that he had that contact. He could have gone through life and never had that kind of individual in his life or teacher. So, again, it's back to what we talked about last week of trying to find people in your life that are positive and believe in you, rather than those who bring you down. One other final comment for the panel. From people we've interviewed over the years, oftentimes people that put you down are people who are not very secure in themselves.
Right.
And since they don't have good self-esteem, if they put you down, they seem to think they're better than you. So you need to be around people who are also positive about themselves.
You know, I ran across a statement one time, it's certainly not mine, and I don't remember the author of it, but it said, people who've given up on their dreams will try to kill yours.
Great way to put it, yes. Janelle Burke.
There are two words in the English language that are very important. That's thank you.
Yes.
And you talk about thank you in your book. And can you share with our viewers what your position is on those two words?
I think thank you comes from a sense of being filled with generosity and being filled with enough. And I think it's hard for people to say thank you if they don't feel not confident, that's not what I'm getting to. If they don't feel a sense of peace within themselves, I think it's really hard for them to say thank you to another individual.
A sincere thank you.
A sincere thank you, absolutely. And I think that thank you is a way for our souls to connect. It's a way for us to meet at a different plane and recognize that, you know, we are all equals here. And to thank another individual, whether they're, you know, whatever position they may hold in relationship to you, is a way to it's a way to recognize their own sacredness.
Now, you also talk about our need for a legacy to pass on.
Yeah.
And legacy is such an important thing to us. I think we talk about presidents wanting to leave a legacy, but everyone wants to know, what is my legacy going to be, or how am I going to be remembered?
Yeah.
And can you share with us about that?
Yeah. Many, many years ago, somewhere deep in here, there was a hole that kind of opened up in me, and it was an aching hole. And I think if we stop and think about it long enough, most of us will find that we've experienced that at some point, where there was something missing. And I think that leads to our legacy, because I do believe that we're all here to contribute to this planet with the special skills and capabilities and talents and passions that we have. And that when we don't do that, we ache in that hole if we recognize that it's there. And I will take it one step further. I will say that not only is fulfilling that destiny, if you will, or leaving that legacy of contribution, not only does that fulfill us, but it's actually our responsibility. That to not do that is cheating the world. And when I told that to people before, when I've asked that question or made that statement, they've stopped and they've thought about it and they went, you know, I never really looked at it from that perspective. I always just figured that whether I fulfilled on my own dream or not was kind of up to me, you know, and it really didn't matter to anybody else. But I really do believe that it does matter to everyone else, that if we don't do what we came here to do, the rest of us are harmed by that, or at least cheated out of it.
I love your quote that you're kind of a byline. Is it Proust? Do you say?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I've heard it pronounced both ways, but I pronounce it Proust. Yes.
Proust. Yes. Would you tell us about it and how it became so important to you?
Yeah. Well, you know, Patty, that came to me years and years and years ago, and I saw it in a magazine. I still have that magazine page. I ripped it out and put it on my wall, and I've had it ever since. And the quote is, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And I would have to say that if I had to choose a theme in my life that represents how I've tried to live my life, or at least how I perceive it, that's it, wrapped in one sentence. Because I think that, and you mentioned earlier last week around seeking, I have been a seeker for most of my life. I have looked outside of myself for answers for most of my life. Even my boat that I lived on in California was named Seeker, and it was named after me. So by my manager, she said, "I think you should call it Seeker." So, but I think that when we recognize that it's not about changing our landscape, it's not about getting a new job, getting a new spouse, moving to a new location, buying a new car, it's not about those things that will really, truly make a difference in our lives, that then we begin to see things differently. And that's where the new eyes kind of come in. So that's kind of what I try to help people with in the Sequoia Seed, is to have new eyes, you know, see the same things they've been looking at forever with a different lens, if you will. Yeah.
Excellent.
We're going to have to end on this note in about 2 minutes, but I learned from not only your statements here, but reading your book, that one of your very positive characteristics is that you love connecting with people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
You're not just trying to deal with, you've dealt with corporations, you've dealt with, at Nordstrom, different customers with different backgrounds. So that's one of the beauties of your book, and that you learn from people from all walks of life, and it's not an elitist approach to life.
Well, and a large part of this book was based on my interaction with my e-zine subscribers, and they're in Kuala Lumpur, and Germany, and Australia, and I mean, they're all over the place, and so that interaction with them talked to me about our differences, but it spoke to me even more highly about what we have in common, and that's what's in the book.
Well, that's inclusion and that's diversity, and so you certainly are about that. On behalf of our panel and our staff, Karen Wright, the author of the Sequoia Seed, thank you for being with us for 2 weeks. We've really enjoyed this.
Thank you. It's been a ball.
It's been inspiring to us, too. Ladies and gentlemen, I would really recommend this book to you, and I hope you've enjoyed the program for the last 2 weeks as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. And I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at the same time, and we'll move to yet another issue. As you know, every 2 or 3 weeks we go to yet another issue. Again, also feel free to write to us or to call us about suggestions that you have for our program. Until next week, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.